Just some quick introduction words. I mean, I'm going to leave it up to the Green European Foundation representatives to introduce themselves and their work. We just want from SAY to thank you again for counting on your participation. We're all very excited to hear what you have for us prepared. I will give the floor to Mariana Batista and Carlota Weber. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am Mariana and I am joined by Carlota, which is also on the screen, having a little wave to us.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we are from the Green European Foundation, which is a European level political foundation. We are funded by the European Parliament. We are linked to, but independent of other green actors, such as the European Green Party, as well as the Green Group in the European Parliament. And so here, where we are here today to give you a workshop presentation, I will be sharing my screen and I will be asking you guys if you'll be able to see it. As Beatriz was saying, you can ask questions, particularly because Carlota will be doing a presentation first, and then I will be following her presentation. You can ask questions once she is done between the both of us, because it probably would be easier that way, but we will also be having a 10-minute part at the end where you can ask all of your questions as well. I will say though, Beatrice, if you can help me, because I will be sharing my screen, I might not be able to see the interactions right away. So if you could just step in at any point and let us know, that would be really useful. Thank you so much. Okay, perfect. So I will attempt here to share my screen, if that is okay. Can you guys see it?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. So just to give you an idea of what we were going to do, we are going to clarify the roles and the responsibilities of the main institutions of the European Union. We will then clarify the competences of the EU and its member states in regards to policy making and legislation. We will then examine how EU law is made and how each of us can influence this process. And this is the really important part, and what we're really trying to drive in the workshop is not only giving you the information, but also giving you the knowledge and tools as well, so that you can make an impact. And this is how the workshop will kind of be divided in terms of first the knowledge base and then how you can get involved, which then brings us to the access to the resourceful tools to further your knowledge on the processes. And then through a series of case studies, and that's where we will also have Timothy coming on to do a presentation of how you can get involved. And these are through different initiatives, but it'll be really nice to have him here to talk about his own experience because it's always easier to learn through an example. So I wouldn't say we're not going to follow the agenda to the T because of the minutes have already kind of passed as well, which is totally fine. We have tried to keep it short to allow for these interactions as well as your questions, because at the end of the day, it is a workshop and we're trying to be as interactive as possible. There's also, of course, the added factor that we're not in the same location, in the same place, and it can be difficult through Zoom because we're all looking at each other through a screen, and we may not even be looking at each other if the person is not talking. So I really do encourage for the interactivity, please do ask questions if you have them. If you want to wait until the end, write them down, and we will give the time for that, both in our presentation, but as well as Timothy, he will have some time as well within his part to answer any questions that you guys may have. Is that clear to everyone before we start, or is there anything that maybe was not clear? Maybe just a thumbs up, I could see. Okay, perfect. Great, okay, so I will let Carlota take the floor. If you can just let me know, Carlota, when you need to go to the next slide, and I will follow along.
I will. Okay, so as Mariana already said, so first of all, hi, I'm Carlota. Thanks for joining on Saturday morning. I really appreciate that. As Mariana already said, I will focus a bit on first clarifying who's who in the EU, to then go into the EU law making process, as all the main institutions are involved in that. But I have tried to really outline in this process, which is a very complicated one, so bear with me, where the points are where we can basically influence as citizens, in particular, if we work on issues that are decided on the EU level and we want to leverage here or lobby for a good cause. So next slide. First, let's look at the three main institutions that are working together, hopefully, and not against each other, and are deciding basically the fate of the EU. So firstly, we have the European Council, which defines the EU's overall political direction and priorities. So it sets the EU's political agenda. The members of the European Council are the heads of the state or government of the 27 EU member states, the European Council President, Charles Michel at the moment, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The European Council mostly takes its decisions by consensus. However, in certain specific cases outlined in the EU treaties, they have to be unanimous or by a qualified majority. There is also the Council of the EU, so not to confuse. No, not, sorry. The Council of the EU, where the ministers of the EU member states come together per policy area to adopt laws and coordinate policies. So their tasks are to negotiate and adopt EU laws, to coordinate the member states' policies, to develop common foreign and security policy, to conclude international treaties, and to adopt the EU budget, which is quite important. Then we have the European Commission. So every country gets to nominate one commissioner. So there are 27 members in total, including one president. And the commissioners together are known as college. The Commission helps shape the EU overall strategy, proposes new EU laws and policies, monitors their implementation, and manages the EU budget. So each commissioner is responsible for one policy area. So this is basically like, you could say, the government, right? The cabinet on the EU level. And those are the ministers in the EU. So you have a portfolio for energy, one for transport, one for health and food safety. And now, most notably, you probably have talked about it yesterday, there is a commissioner, Timmermans, who's responsible for the European Green Deal. As the sort of flagship project of this von der Leyen Commission. And last but not least, we have the European Parliament, and I'm emphasizing this not only because our funding comes from there, but let's have a closer look. So next slide, because it is quite an important institution because it's the only one on the EU level that is directly elected once every 5 years by the citizens of the now 27 member states. So following the Brexit early this year, there are now slightly less members of the European Parliament. So we went down from 751 to 705. However, one of the seats allocated to Spain has not yet been filled, so there are currently 704 MEPs in the European Parliament. So what happened with Brexit is that not all obviously because the numbers of citizens that have to be represented in the EU decreased. So it was a logical step that the representatives in the Parliament would also decrease. But they didn't just cut all the seats, but reallocated some of the spots to smaller countries. So Spain, well, not smaller country, but also Austria and Finland got some more seats in the European Parliament. And obviously, the more citizens a country has, the more members they get to represent them in the European Parliament. So what you can see here is basically the current seat distribution in the European Parliament in the 9th parliamentary term. In the European Parliament, there are no parties per se, but they're called political groups. So this means, for instance, in the political family that is close to us, you have the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament, which basically gathers the members of the European Parliament from all the different Green parties across the EU that managed to have representatives elected. There is no official coalition in the European Parliament because there is no government affiliated to it. So on a case-by-case basis, political groups can form different majorities to support proposals, which means that it can be quite powerful also for smaller political groups, because if you cooperate across borders and convince other political groups with constructive proposals, yeah, even if you come from a smaller political group, you can be successful in pushing policies. But it still happens in many cases that the two biggest groups that you can see here, so the EPP, which are the Christian Democrats, and the S&D, which are the Social Democrats, strike basically a deal and align their voting, which then obviously means that, yeah, they're overpowering the others. However, this changed a bit with the last European elections. So now we say that often Renew Europe, which are the liberals, and the Greens are basically kingmakers. So they have to be convinced, at least in part, to vote with those two bigger fractions. Next slide, please. To clarify the EU lawmaking process and where we can actually step in, it obviously is important to clarify what is actually decided on the EU level, because I mean, we're not the United States of Europe yet. So there is still quite a lot of power that is with the nation states, right? So it is, yeah, it is important to know where is actually the power with the EU level, so we can dock there and lobby there and don't have to go through the national governments. So obviously the mandate to the EU is given by the member states through the EU treaties, and there are basically three principles that determine how and in what areas the EU may act. So firstly, as I just said, one important point is the conferral. So the EU has only that authority conferred upon it by the EU treaties, which have been ratified by all member states. Then there's proportionality. So the EU action cannot exceed what is necessary to achieve the objectives of the treaties. And there's subsidiarity, which is an important principle. So in areas where either the EU or national governments can act, the EU may intervene only if it can act more effectively. So there always has to be this kind of measuring. There are three different ways in which legislation is made in the EU. So there are exclusive competences of the EU. And I think those have been a bit more, yeah, those are a bit more prominent, and there you hear more about Brussels and about EU making. A lot of them have been quite important when it comes to Brexit as well. So one competence is the customs union, competition rules for the single market, monetary policy, of course, for the Eurozone countries, trade and international agreements, and then marine policies regulated by the common fishery policy. Then we have the possibility that the EU gives supporting competences to national governments. I'm not going to go through all the different policy areas maybe, but here I would just like to underline, because of the current situation of COVID-19, public health would be such an area. So where we have also seen that, well, member states were quite struggling to coordinate with the EU. So I think they are currently discussing how this can maybe be improved in the future. Then there are shared competences of the EU and national governments, which actually constitutes the biggest batch of policy areas. So those are, for instance, then employment and social affairs, economic, social and territorial cohesion, agriculture, environment, transport, energy. So those are, yeah, the areas where they work together. Additionally, in certain areas, special competences enable the EU to play a particular role or to go beyond what is normally allowed under the treaties. So coordination of economic and employment policies, definition and implementation of a common foreign and security policy, and the flexibility clause, which under strict condition enables the EU to take action outside its normal areas of responsibility. Next slide, please. So if we have established that the EU has the lawmaking power in a certain area, then how does it happen? I will focus on the ordinary legislative procedure, which was known as Codecision before the Lisbon Treaty, which is basically the most common way of lawmaking in the EU. So yeah, normally this would be the process. So the European Commission introduces a proposal for a new law, and the European Parliament and the European Council can make changes. And only when both Parliament and Council agree with the proposal, it can become a law. Well, that sounds very easy, but there are many steps in between. And obviously, Council and European Parliament are not always so much in agreement. So, as I just said, the Commission proposes a draft for a regulation, directive, or decision. And in total, there can be 3 readings by the co-legislators, meaning Parliament and Council. And if they agree on the text, conclude the procedure at any reading. So they don't have to have 3 readings, basically. Before the Commission proposes new initiatives, however, it does impact assessments. So it looks at the potential economic, social, and environmental consequences that they may have, and set out the advantages and disadvantages of possible policy options. So for instance, now, if the European Commission would propose a new initiative, it should look also at its own priority set. All right, so the European Green Deal should hopefully in all decisions play a big role. And in that regard, a lot of focus should be put on environmental impact assessment. The Commission also consults at this stage already interested parties such as non-governmental organizations, local authorities, representatives of industry, of civil society, takes the advice of experts on technical issues. Citizens, businesses, and organizations can participate in the consultation procedure via a specific website on public consultations. So at this stage, also national parliaments can already formally express their reservations if they feel that it would be better to deal with an issue on a national rather than the EU level. So you can see here that already at this stage, citizens or organizations can have an influence and basically try to get the Commission also to propose a new initiative. So it can already happen that the Commission is maybe not taking the action you wanted, and there are some ways to basically make them aware of issues and try to give them a nudge. For instance, there's the European Citizens Initiative, and I believe we will hear later a great example. This initiative can be started by citizens, by NGOs, and once it reaches over 1 million signatures, the European Commission has to react to it, basically. So it can then also review it and decide not to take legal action, but it has to deal with it and basically consider it. Another possibility is to participate, as I said, in the public consultations. So there might be green papers where the Commission outlines, well, this would be an area where we see a challenge and we might need to act. So that's very informal. And then the next stage would be white papers where they're already getting more concrete and what the action would be. So there is a possibility to influence that. At the first reading, the Parliament and the Council examine then in parallel the Commission's proposal. It is, however, the Parliament that acts first. So voting by a simple majority and usually on the basis of a report that is prepared by the responsible committee in the European Parliament. So in most cases, they either amend the Commission's proposal with some additional points or with asking to cut certain aspects. And they can also adopt it, of course, without amendments. And it can also reject the proposal altogether. Also at this stage, citizens can of course exercise influence because you can participate in public hearings that are taking place in the European Parliament. So a lot of European Parliament sessions are broadcasted live online. And you can also take even more direct action by lobbying your own MEP to become involved on tabled amendments. Obviously, this is a bit more complicated. You have to find out which MEPs are in certain committees and choose the right ones, because of course not every MEP is dealing with every proposal that is coming into the Parliament. After the Parliament has adopted its position, it's the Council's turn. So here, citizens can also try to influence their national governments, which are represented in the Council, to change their position when they go into the Council meeting. The Council can either accept the Parliament's position, in which case the legislation is adopted after the first hearing, or if they have a different position at this first hearing and communicate this to the European Parliament to then go into the second reading. In very general terms, the second reading in this ordinary legislative procedure follows a similar logic and pattern as the first reading. Next slide, please. However, when you compare it to the first reading, there are some key differences. So while both Council and Parliament don't have any time limit for their first reading, each of the co-legislators has in the second reading 3 months, only extendable by 1 month, to adopt the position in the second reading, so to basically speed up the process. And as regards to the voting majorities in the Parliament, at the second reading, Parliament rejects or amends the Council's first reading position by an absolute majority of its members. So that would be 353 out of 705 votes, rather than by a simple majority, as is the case in the first reading. Yeah, the points of entry, I would say, for citizens to influence the decision making are very similar to those in the first reading, as you can see here. So there's still a possibility to lobby MEPs and to try to lobby national government's positions by, I don't know, raising awareness in a certain nation state and get a conversation going, for instance. If there's still no agreement within the phase of the second reading, we enter the conciliation. Next slide, please. And the conciliation is the third and final stage of the procedure. It is open if the Council cannot accept all the amendments adopted by the Parliament at the second reading. It consists of negotiations between the two co-legislators in the framework of the conciliation committee, with the objective of reaching an agreement, obviously in the form of a joint text, which then has to be confirmed by both Parliament and the Council in the third reading. Still, citizens can influence the process by trying to influence their MEPs to amend the joint text, how to vote on it, as well as try to exercise influence on their national governments represented in the Council. And depending on the outcome of the votes in the respective institutions, if they agree the legal act is adopted, and if not, then not. Then yeah, that's the end of this proposal then. So that's a not so uncomplicated legislative procedure in the EU. I hope this is helpful to understand a bit, yeah, what happens and what the key entry points could be, where you can still get active and mobilize, even if a legal text is maybe already in the works. So this is not, you know, the end of the story. There is a possibility to stop a certain legal action, to mobilize for it, to lobby for it, or to push for changes that have to be done. And I hope it has also been helpful to understand what the powers of the different institutions actually are within this process. Maybe to add that nowadays in practice, most proposals are actually adopted at the first reading. So the reason for this is that the European institutions already hold extensive negotiations before the Commission formally submits a proposal. So very, very often, the Commission already tables a proposal that it has discussed with the European Parliament and the Council. Next slide. So this is to say that, well, there's still a possibility to be active, but it's still really important for work, for activism that you're doing, to stay engaged and follow what is happening on the EU level. So I wanted to give specifically 2 recommendations. The first one is votewatch.eu. You can find out here how your MEPs are voting in the European Parliament and what the government decides in the European Council. And you can get updates from the European level on different topics. It's specifically useful because contrary to the European Parliament, the Council is a bit more secretive. So there are no minutes, there are no notes on the different meetings. So keeping a bit engaged and seeing how your government votes is really important to then also hold national politicians accountable in the next elections for their actions on the EU level, and the same for MEPs. So you can also filter on this website by committee, for instance. So if you're interested in one policy area, you can find out, okay, what's the voting record of a specific group in the Parliament, of a specific MEP. So that's a very useful tool. The other one, it's a bit more complicated, in my opinion, to navigate, is the Legislative Train. It's a website by the European Parliament. So it's called Legislative Train because they're using trains and carriages and railways as a metaphor to basically show us the state of play of upcoming initiatives, legislative proposals and procedures that may already be finalized. And they also show the different issues that are blocked or that were withdrawn. So it's being updated monthly. And you can research the files either by one of the Commission's current 6 priorities, or the different committees in the European Parliament where they worked on. So you could select the committee for transport and tourism, and then you could see everything that has been there proposed basically in this legislative term, and then also see where they are standing. So this could also help you already at this stage to be really engaged and make up your own opinion basically on what is happening. So that's it from my side. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them if I can. Thanks very much. I'll give it over to Mariana if there are no questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, she's no longer here, but I want to thank Carlotta for that excellent presentation, but it actually feeds in quite nicely into the next part of the presentation, which is how do you actually get access to this information? I'm sure that for many of you, perhaps because we don't know necessarily the background of all of the participants today, but this may have been new information, this may have been more detailed information than ever before. And that is something that we at the Green European Foundation completely understand and is part of our working program to ensure that there's greater involvement by citizens in European politics. So one of the ways that we do that is actually through our e-learning platform. So a lot of the information, for example, that Carlotta went through is available through courses. And so this is what it kind of looks like. I will try not to toggle through here and the website, but we will give and hopefully be able to send all of the links to all the participants today, because it is quite important to be able to know all this information and learn, but more so is how do you do so in a centralized database, and also in a way that is simple and that the language works, because we do understand, being in Europe, that chances are not everyone's native language is English. And although that is the language that we're working in, we do take that into account very seriously in terms of the way that we provide and disseminate our courses. So an important thing to mention is that we actually have a very, very large range of courses. And one important thing to note is that they all have a green element, but they're all connected to the EU in some way or another. And this is also because the courses are basically different topics that interest individuals like yourselves, individuals who want to develop their own knowledge, but also their activism skills, because that's something that's quite important. And it's also what has brought all of you here today, is because you do have that drive and the motivation to learn more and to also be active. And that's something that we take quite seriously within the courses, is that there's always a very large component of how to get involved. And this will of course always change from topic to topic and course to course, but that's something that we provide our learners with links and ways for them to get involved within you know, their local or their national governments, but also at an EU level. And another important thing to mention of the courses is that, yes, there are topics that are, I mean, hot topics, as one would say, that are interesting in the moment, but there are also a lot of them dissemination of projects, which means our partners at Jeff, they will create projects at an EU level. And a lot of the times, or one of the largest things of any project usually is the dissemination component. And that usually is through some kind of event or a conference. But a lot of the times we actually turn that into a course, and then is available publicly, which to learners and the target groups that sometimes are quite young, from the age of 16 to 30 at times. And that's also another way to be up to date, because the courses are up to date and they are reflective of the challenges that the EU is currently facing. Which actually brings us to one of our most important courses that is called Impact Europe. And this course gives you an insider view actually into the EU, the European lawmaking process, the challenges that green actors face, and actually the information that in the presentation that Carlotta just gave, we have created it into different videos, interactive content. And one thing that we really try to do is to keep all of our learners engaged, but also understand that everyone learns at a different pace and in different ways. Some people are more visual learners, some people it's more for listening, writing. And so we really try to ensure that there are assignments that work for everyone. And I actually do want to show this video. It's about 3 minutes long, and I know we're a little bit short on time, but it's just to kind of give you an example of how you can learn information similar to the presentation just given, but in a very different way that's quite interactive. And that's something that we really pride ourselves on within the platform, is to really give you that knowledge, but in a different way. So I'm gonna see if I can play it. Should work. Can you hear it though? No?
No,
Nope.
I can't at least.
No, but the sound is on the bottom. Click on the sound there and raise it. Move it up, the brown thing.
Sorry, it's because all of the videos were covering that. Okay, it should work now. No?
And although the Parliament or a group of citizens can ask the Commission is the only institution that gets to propose new laws. And although the Parliament or a group of citizens can ask the Commission to propose new laws, they tend to listen more to the many corporate lobbyists around that see laws as a burden instead of protection. Let's get to work. The Commission sends a new proposal to the Parliament, and they can either support it or decide to make changes to it. One member, called the rapporteur, is charged with organising this process. The rapporteur works together in a team of shadow rapporteurs of all political groups. The draft is first discussed and adapted in the appropriate parliamentary committees. In this discussion, we Greens try to convince our colleagues of our ideas, but also lots of others try to influence, from professional lobbyists with lots of resources to NGOs with volunteers or petitions. Next, the Parliament takes the final decision in a plenary meeting, meaning all members get to vote on it. At the same time, the Council of Ministers form an opinion on the proposed law as well, but contrary to the Parliament, They do this mostly behind closed doors. They can also make changes and take a vote. If Parliament and Council don't agree on the content of the law, which is quite often the case, they get together. The rapporteur and shadows, all political groups on behalf of the European Parliament, negotiate with representatives of the Council and the Commission. Together they try to find a compromise. This is called a trialogue. When they find a compromise, the new proposal goes back to the Parliament and the Council for a final vote. If they both agree, the law is passed. Officials from the Commission and Member States, with help from outside experts, will now work out the details. This is called comitology. The Parliament can intervene if necessary, so the Greens always keep an eye out on the process. And so you see, sometimes we succeed in greening a proposal by the Commission, but sometimes we don't. We hope we helped you to understand a little of what goes on in the European politics. The important thing to know is that through national and European elections, you can help steer Europe in a greener direction. European Greens will do their best in Brussels, but they need your support from national level.
I hope you enjoyed that little video. So basically, that's actually how most of our courses are. Or we're taking things, topics, processes that can be a little bit more complicated to understand, or that you just simply don't have enough experience with, and that's also understandable. But trying to really ensure that it's packaged in a way that is accessible to everyone. And that's actually what brings me to the next slide, which is part of this course, the Impact Europe course, is a project that is done by all of the learners. We obviously don't have the time to go through that today, but I just want to go through it with you because a lot of the projects and the assignments that we have are kind of a reflection for the learner. So particularly in my graduation project, it asks you to go through the course, but you could actually do it on your own because it's what it's asking you is what you already know about the EU. What is it that you're lacking in terms of information? Once you know what's missing, you know where to go next. But then it also asks you on the, what contributions are you making currently for this European vision that you may have? It's important to kind of put ourselves in that place of reflection, but also asking on what do we want to do? Because as Carlotta had gone through some of the different ways of getting involved, they do exist, and I will also go through those very shortly. But it's important to know that you can get kind of bogged down on all of that information. As she had mentioned, there exists the maze and it has all of these streams. It's not necessarily that, you know, individuals at the EU level want to confuse you. That's not the case at all. But chances are that it just is very complicated processes. And so we really try to break those down and so that you know exactly where you can get involved and what are the skills that you want to further develop. And that's a lot what of our courses are, is giving you those skills and then giving you the resources and the links to go ahead and do them. And another important thing that I wanted to mention is actually our platform, our beloved platform, is getting a massive update. And it'll be launched next month, which next month is next week. So very exciting towards the end of the month. And one thing that we would love to do is to send all of you the first link to the website. A really important thing is that actually the Impact Europe course has also received or is getting an update. And part of the case study will be the EU recovery deal, which is of course still ongoing. And we foresee that we will create more courses about that. But it is important to show and to showcase that our courses are constantly being updated to one, reflect what is happening on the EU at the EU level, the topics that are important to the citizens, and as well as our target group, which is a younger generation who wants to be involved, may not yet have the skills needed, but has the interest, and probably will go to some very great ends to be able to get as involved as possible. So I will hopefully be able to send you guys all of this information in the upcoming weeks. If you, we could either, and I'm not sure how Beatrice you want to do it, you guys could just either send your email to us or write it in the chat, or I will get access from the participant list if you agree. Of course, if not, you can still just go on the platform on your own time, but it would be nice for you guys to be the first ones to get a chance to go through the course yourself and be able to learn. And so this brings me to the actual case study component, and I realize that time is slowly ticking by. I'm not sure if Timothy has joined us yet or if he's waiting.
So I think, unfortunately, Timothy won't be able to join us today. We couldn't reach him, so
okay.
It's a pity because yes, he would be doing his presentation now. You are.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would still have a little bit to go over. I mean, the next part is the case studies. Hopefully he'll be able to contact us after or be able to send a link, or Beatrice, maybe you could perhaps send a link on his initiative. But in any case, I will go through a few case studies because this part is how you can get involved. And that's the component that I mentioned, is that all of our courses, yes, you do have the knowledge, the foundation. We want everybody to have this base, but we also go one step further in ensuring that you know how to get involved. And so it's because it's clear to our learners that when they arrive to our platform, they're not just looking for knowledge, they're looking for skills as well. And we really try to equip them with that. And so the first case study that we'll go through, there are 3 different ways that we will go through it. One is online activism. The second is consultation, and then petition. And the last 2 case studies are ones that Carlotta had already mentioned, but I will go in a little bit more detail about them and kind of the processes of how they work. So the first one is online activism. But the interesting thing is that it didn't necessarily used to be online, this particular initiative, which is the Fridays for Future. And I'm not sure how many of you have already been involved with Fridays for Future, and it could have been through the strikes originally in the last year. But if you don't know, just to give you a very quick update. So it is the global climate strike that's led by Greta Thunberg, and it's been going on since 2018 in August. The really interesting thing, though, is that it's reached over 13 million people from all across the world, which is quite the feat. Now, the interesting thing is this movement that has been taking place and moving activism online. And that's something that is quite unprecedented, we would say, but it has shown some really interesting advantages. So for first thing, this is actually one of the best examples that we have right now, is to show how activism can take place in an online space. Now, the reality is actually a lot of activism is moving online. And more so since the last couple months, I guess the last 6 months with the situation with COVID. There are, of course, many disadvantages, such as perhaps you would see or say that having the summer school online could be a disadvantage, though I would argue that there are a lot of advantages because perhaps we wouldn't have been able to take part as speakers in this online event. And that actually leads me further to how many other online events and meetings and conferences have gone virtually, and how that has given more access to individuals who probably wouldn't have access. So this tied in with activism really does showcase that it's no longer that exclusive. So many like high level conferences in the last couple months have been made available to you, for example, which then allows you access or inside access to knowledge that perhaps you wouldn't have had otherwise. And that's a really important move because this is the way that it's going to be the future, our norms, which also means that online activism is going to be more and more prevalent. Of course, there are many other ways apart from just Fridays for Future, but this is just a simple example to show this move. Because of course, many would argue that, you know, having all of these students in one area and protesting, it does create an intense symbol, which I wouldn't argue against that. But simultaneously, it means that their movement didn't stop once they were no longer allowed to be congregated in one area. And that's the really important thing, is that activism actually adapts to like whatever is happening around it. And that's really important, and which also allows us to know that we can also always be part of activism in some way. We can always be active because there are many avenues to do so. So that is the connection really to our courses, but you can also be active at an EU level, which is within the EU institutions. And I think that's where a lot of the interest from what I've understood from the participants today. And I will kind of go over the consultation part, which is something that Carlotta had already discussed. And this is making sure that your voice is heard within the EU institutions. And this is through the consultation process, where citizens and businesses as well are kind of invited to contribute to the new EU policies. And this is through feedback and comments as well, which are then translated into more concrete policy options. So if you actually go through the website, for example, you will find these different highlights, as you can see, and you can just automatically go ahead and have your say. Now, what you may think, and this was a question that was asked, is like, how much power do I actually have? Now, they, particularly in Have Your Say, it is quite transparent because you are able to give your feedback before and after laws are made and actually throughout the progress. Because the EU or the EU Commission is listening to citizens at every step. So they're actually creating roadmaps for citizens so that they can provide their experience as well as their feedback. And so the consultations are open, the contributions are received, and the feedback is continuous. And that's what's really important, because it makes the citizen feel like they're part of the legislation from the beginning to the end. And this is also, particularly this initiative is quite important because even once we go through, and now we've gone through it twice, when Carlotta explained the process, the legislation process, and then we watched a video, it does really seem like we don't have much of a say. And as I said, I don't think this is done particularly on purpose, but I just do think that it is quite complicated in of itself. So these kinds of programs and these kinds of initiatives and consultation processes are very important for us, for everyone, I would say, as a citizen, because it allows you to be part of something that's a lot larger than yourself, but that affects you directly. So this is an excellent way. And I mean, of course, there's not always going to be a highlight that interests you directly, but you're able to go through all of them on your own time. And again, the most important thing for us as well, particularly in the e-learning platform, but as Jeff as a whole, is to ensure that citizens are involved. But once they are involved, that they have the tools and resources to make decisions that make sense for them. And so this brings me to the last example, which is a European Citizen Initiative, which is also something that Carlotta had mentioned. And there are many different ones. I picked the Right to Water example. Timothy was actually supposed to talk about his own example that he did, and I hope that we'll be able to send a link after in any case, because it is a really interesting initiative. So basically, for example, to give you a background of what the Right to Water initiative was, it started with the UN in 2010, when they had declared that water and sanitation was a human right, and it was expected to increase like water and sanitation to people across the world, but like including Europe. And the issue at hand was that there was a lot of talk about it, and then suddenly that talk kind of just decreased or was no longer being heard. And that's something that happens quite often. So with these initiatives, you kind of bring the topic back up, and then you start to kind of pressure the EU to listen. And so that's how it works. So particularly there was a lot of worry with citizens saying that water resources, they didn't want them to be subject to the internal market rules, which is completely understandable. But so how do they go about this? Well, they started to pressure EU institutions and member states to listen. And as Carlotta had mentioned, this is through signatures, and they actually were able to collect 2 million signatures. And so once they did, they were able to address the demands and propose this drinking water directive. Now, of course, just by having signatures, things don't just, become what they want them to become and everything is fine. Obviously, that's not the case. There needs to be more pressure, but the point is that the conversations are being had and that these directives are on the table, and they're not just something that they say, yes, we're going to get to it, and then they never do. So there are these avenues that exist. Now, how you go about it, these are only 3 ways, online activism, so keeping yourself busy and still being able to be part of protests, but not physically, of course, because of the situations that we have. Consultation, so being part of the legislation process at all times. If you do go onto that website, it explains in a lot more detail just how connected and up to date you can be, and how your feedback is really used, because in reality it is. It's not just something that goes into a computer and it's just hanging out in a database and nobody goes through it. They really do use the feedback, and they have an example there of this man who had gone through all of the, he had given all the feedback, and how he actually was speaking to someone on the other side who was interacting with him. So it's important to know that these avenues for you to be heard are not just like a computer that's doing it. In reality, there is a lot of interaction, and of course there can always be more. There's always the argument that it should be even more, which we should also pressure further for that, but they do exist. And of course with petitions, you may feel like, oh, just signing your name, what is that going to do? But it does, because these numbers add up. And 1 million is what you need, but 2 million is even better, in the sense that it's a problem and a lot of people are talking about it. And so all of these examples, of course, there are so many more. And that was, for example, which I will just kind of show you what we were meant to talk about further, which was a case study that Timothy Galver and his friends had, they launched like a European citizen initiative to end the aviation fuel tax exemption. And they were actually able to go further and further with it. And so at this time, I believe they were students, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite possible to do this at a young age. You have the resources for it. Of course, you need the drive as well. And I think by just you guys being here, you already have the drive because you have an interest. And that's enough really to get started, because once you have that interest, then you just start looking at different tools, different knowledge, taking courses, talking to people, networking. Networking is also a really important way, and something that we value and that we try to allow participants and learners to do so on our platform, but as well within Jeff, because part of our working program is also networking. There's many organizations that have other ways for you to get involved. It's just simply doing a little bit of research, but usually the way that it works, particularly in this field perhaps, or this network, is once you know one person, you can kind of just keep connecting the dots and moving forward. So I hope that I was able to give you guys some new information. Of course, maybe you were looking for more of like the nitty-gritty details, and I thank Carlotta for doing that because it was excellent. But what I really wanted to focus on is, how do you actually find this information? Was it maybe too long or too complicated for you to understand? Are there other ways, or are you actually looking for more information? Because that is also a possibility. Our courses, some of them are more general and more of a crash course, you could say, but others are quite specific. Particularly the Greener Cities course may be of interest because they have a lot of topics on sustainability and green energy. So that's, from what I've understood, something that interests all of you as well. So there is something for everyone on the platform. And it is always a really good way to start, to just kind of get the engine going, start thinking about maybe new perspectives, things you didn't know about. It's also difficult sometimes to be up to date all the time with everything that's going on. And that is something also that Carlotta had mentioned, that it does require a lot of work on your end to be up to date with all of the different initiatives and all the different ways to get involved. And it's going to be normal that you won't always be able to do all of it, but you can do some of it. And some of it doesn't take as long. A petition is just writing your name, but it still means that you're part of a greater cause. So I hope I was able to give you the tools or resources you're looking for. I hope you guys enjoyed the workshop. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get more of an example on the case studies. I'm really hoping that we can get the link, and you guys will have access to the link as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mariana. This was really, really insightful. This was a great presentation from both you and Carlotta.